It was a chilly autumn evening, and the small rural town was settling into its usual stillness. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink as the faint sound of rustling leaves filled the air. A narrow dirt road stretched across an open field, bordered by tall oaks that swayed gently in the wind. Sitting by the roadside was a young boy, his knees drawn close to his chest as he wiped tears from his reddened cheeks. His name was Eli, a quiet 12-year-old who often wandered the countryside when the weight of his thoughts became too much to bear. Tonight, the isolation of the vast field felt comforting, yet his sadness lingered like the cool breeze brushing against his skin. Eli had always been reserved, more comfortable with animals than people. After losing his father a year ago, he found solace in nature, often escaping to the open plains near his family's modest farmhouse. But this evening was different. His loneliness felt sharper, cutting through the peaceful surroundings. He lowered his head, burying his face in his hands, unaware that he wasn't truly alone. A faint sound broke through his quiet sobs, the rhythmic thudding of hooves against the dirt. Eli lifted his head, his teary eyes scanning the horizon. At first, he saw nothing, but then, emerging from the distant tree line, a group of horses appeared, their silhouettes majestic against the fading light. There were 4 of them, their sleek bodies moving gracefully as they approached the road. Eli froze, unsure of what to do. These weren't farm horses. They belonged to the wild herd that roamed freely beyond the town's borders. He had heard stories about them, how they kept their distance from humans and were rarely seen near the village. Yet, here they were, moving steadily toward him as if drawn by an unseen force. The lead horse, a tall mare with a strong, commanding presence, stopped a few feet away. Her dark eyes locked onto Eli's, filled with an unspoken wisdom that made his breath catch. The other horses followed suit, forming a loose circle around him. Their movements were calm, deliberate, and strangely protective. Eli wiped his eyes again, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The horses didn't seem threatening. Instead, they stood quietly, their gazes soft and curious. The mare stepped closer, lowering her head as if to meet him on his level. Hesitant but curious, Eli reached out a trembling hand, brushing his fingers lightly against her smooth muzzle. The contact was brief, but it sent a wave of warmth through Eli's chest. It was as though the mare understood his sadness, offering her presence as a form of comfort. The boy felt his tears slow, replaced by a sense of awe at the gentle creatures surrounding him. He looked around at the other horses, noticing how they seemed to form a protective barrier between him and the empty road, their bodies shielding him from the evening breeze. For the first time that day, Eli felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in a long time: connection. He didn't know why the horses had come to him, or what had drawn them to his quiet moment of despair. But their presence felt like a gift, a reminder that he wasn't truly alone. As the minutes passed, Eli sat quietly among the horses, his earlier sadness beginning to fade. The mare remained close, her eyes never leaving his, while the others shifted slightly, their ears twitching at the distant sound of a crow cawing. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the faint hum of a vehicle in the distance. Startled, the horses turned their heads toward the sound, their muscles tensing. Eli looked up, his heart sinking as the headlights of a truck appeared on the road. It was his mother's truck, the familiar old vehicle slowing as it approached. The horses seemed to sense the change in atmosphere and began to retreat, moving in unison toward the field. The mare lingered for a moment, her gaze meeting Eli's one last time before she turned and followed the others into the night. As the truck pulled up, Eli stood, brushing the dirt from his jeans. His mother stepped out, her face a mix of relief and worry. "Eli, I've been looking everywhere for you," she said, her voice soft but firm. He hesitated, glancing back toward the field where the horses had disappeared, then nodded silently. He climbed into the truck, his mind still replaying the strange encounter. His mother didn't press him for details as they drove home, sensing that he needed time to process whatever had happened. Eli stared out the window, the image of the mare's kind eyes etched into his memory. That night, as he lay in bed, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the horses had come to him for a reason. There was something about their presence that felt almost magical, as though they had been sent to remind him of a truth he had forgotten, that even in the loneliest moments the world still had its ways of reaching out, offering connection in the most unexpected forms. The following morning, Eli awoke with the faint memory of the horses lingering in his mind. The encounter felt like a dream, too surreal to be real, yet the warmth he had felt in the mare's gaze was impossible to forget. As sunlight filtered through his bedroom window, Eli decided to head back to the spot where he had met them. He wasn't sure what he hoped to find, but the urge to return was undeniable. Eli slipped on his jacket and sneakers, quietly leaving the house while his mother prepared breakfast. He followed the familiar dirt road, his steps quickening as the field came into view. The chill of the autumn morning hung in the air, but Eli hardly noticed, his focus fixed on the open expanse ahead. As he reached the spot where he had sat the night before, he slowed, scanning the area with hopeful eyes. At first, there was nothing. Just the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a tractor from a neighboring farm. But then, faintly, he heard it. The steady thudding of hooves. His heart leaped as he turned toward the sound, and there they were, emerging from the trees just as they had the night before. The same 4 horses moved gracefully across the field, their presence calm yet purposeful. Eli stood frozen for a moment before stepping forward. The mare, leading the group once again, raised her head, her dark eyes locking onto his with a familiarity that sent a shiver down his spine. It was as if she had been waiting for him, knowing he would return. She approached slowly, her steps deliberate, while the other horses hung back, grazing peacefully on the tall grass. This time, Eli didn't hesitate. He reached out as the mare came closer, running his fingers along her muzzle with a growing sense of wonder. "Why did you come to me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Of course, there was no answer, but the mare's steady presence felt like a response in itself. Eli felt a strange, unspoken connection to her, as though she understood his sadness in a way no one else could. As he stood with the mare, the other horses began to gather around him once more, forming the same protective circle they had the night before. Eli couldn't help but smile, the weight of his loneliness lifting as the horses' quiet strength surrounded him. He felt safe in their presence, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Suddenly, a voice called out from across the field, "Eli, what are you doing out here?" Startled, Eli turned to see his neighbor, Mr. Turner, walking toward him with a curious expression. Mr. Turner was an older man who owned the farm just beyond the hill. He was well known in the town for his knowledge of the land and its creatures, often sharing stories about the wild horses that roamed the area. The horses seemed wary of the newcomer, their ears twitching as they shifted slightly away from Mr. Turner. The mare stayed close to Eli, her posture calm but alert. Eli looked up at Mr. Turner, unsure of how to explain what had happened. "These horses," Eli began, his voice hesitant. "They were here last night too. They surrounded me, I don't know why." Mr. Turner's eyes widened slightly as he took in the scene. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice tinged with amazement. "These are the wild ones. They don't usually come this close to people, let alone stick around like this. It's almost like they've chosen you." "Chosen me?" Eli repeated, his brow furrowing. The idea felt strange, almost unbelievable, yet something about it rang true. Mr. Turner crouched a few feet away, keeping his movements slow so as not to startle the horses. Wild horses are sensitive creatures. They can sense things about people, things we might not even understand ourselves. Maybe they saw something in you, something they wanted to protect. Eli glanced at the mare, her steady gaze meeting his once more. The idea that these majestic animals had chosen to connect with him felt surreal, but deep down, he couldn't deny the comfort they brought. For the first time since his father's passing, Eli felt as though he mattered, as though the world hadn't completely forgotten him. As the morning sun climbed higher, Mr. Turner rose to his feet. "You're lucky, you know," he said, his tone kind. "Not everyone gets to experience something like this. These horses, especially her," he nodded toward the mare, "are special. You should cherish this." Eli nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. He wanted to ask more questions, to understand why the horses had come to him, but before he could speak, the mare stepped back, her movements slow and deliberate. The other horses followed her lead, retreating toward the tree line with the same grace they had arrived with. Eli watched them go, his chest tightening with a mix of sadness and wonder. "Don't worry," Mr. Turner said, placing a reassuring hand on Eli's shoulder. "If they came to you once, they'll come again. Just be patient." Eli nodded again, his gaze fixed on the disappearing figures of the horses. As he and Mr. Turner walked back toward the road, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter was far from over. The bond he had felt with the mare was too strong to be a coincidence, and he couldn't help but wonder what the horses had seen in him, what they might be trying to teach him. Over the next few weeks, Eli found himself returning to the same spot by the dirt road, hoping to see the horses again. Each time, they appeared as if summoned by his presence, emerging from the distant trees with their graceful, deliberate movements. The mare always led the way, her calm and commanding presence setting the tone for their interactions. Eli began to notice the subtle dynamics within the group. The mare was undoubtedly the leader, but the others had their own unique personalities. One was playful, nudging Eli's hands gently with its muzzle, while another seemed shy, keeping a cautious distance but watching him intently. The fourth horse was the largest, a quiet protector who often stood at the edge of the group, scanning their surroundings. As the days passed, Eli started bringing small offerings, apples, carrots, and even a bucket of water on particularly warm afternoons. The horses accepted his gifts with a quiet grace, their trust in him growing with each encounter. The bond between them felt natural, as though they had always been connected. For Eli, these moments became a refuge, a space where he could let go of his grief and simply exist in the presence of creatures who seemed to understand him in ways others couldn't. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Eli sat in the grass with the mare by his side. He traced idle patterns in the dirt with a stick, his thoughts drifting as the soft sounds of the horses grazing filled the air. The quiet was interrupted by a sudden noise, a sharp crack from the woods behind them. The horses froze, their ears pricking forward, their bodies tense. Eli's heart raced as he turned toward the sound. Emerging from the trees was a large man carrying a long rope and a determined expression. Eli recognized him immediately. Mr. Calloway, a rancher from the neighboring town. He was known for capturing wild horses to sell, a practice that had caused tension among the local community. "What are you doing here, boy?" Calloway's voice was gruff as he stepped closer, His eyes shifted to the horses, narrowing with interest. These wild ones don't belong out here. They're better off in someone's stable. Eli stood quickly, his small frame dwarfed by the imposing man. They're not hurting anyone, he said, his voice shaking but firm. They belong here in the wild. Calloway smirked, unfazed by Eli's defiance. Wild's no place for them. They're valuable animals and I've got the skills to tame them. The mare snorted, stepping protectively in front of Eli. The other horses mirrored her movements, forming a tight circle around him. Eli felt a surge of gratitude and awe at their loyalty, but fear gripped him as Calloway took another step forward, his rope swinging ominously at his side. "You should head on home, boy," Calloway said, his tone dismissive. "This isn't your concern." But it was Eli's concern. These horses had become more than just animals to him. They were his friends, his comfort, his connection to something larger than himself. Gathering his courage, Eli stood his ground. "You can't take them," he said, his voice steady now. "They're not yours." Calloway's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, but guts won't stop me." Before Calloway could move closer, a sharp whistle pierced the air. Both Eli and Calloway turned to see Mr. Turner approaching, his pace brisk and his expression stern. "Calloway," he called out, his voice carrying across the field. "What do you think you're doing?" The rancher hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Just taking what doesn't belong to anyone," he said, his tone defensive. "These horses belong to the wild," Turner replied firmly, "and as far as I can see, they've already chosen where they want to be." Calloway frowned, his grip on the rope tightening. "You can't stop me, Turner." "Maybe not," Turner said, his voice calm but resolute. "But I can let the sheriff know about this little expedition of yours. I doubt he'd be too pleased to hear about you harassing a kid and stealing from the land." For a tense moment, Calloway seemed to consider his options. The horses stood motionless, their dark eyes fixed on him, their presence almost intimidating in its quiet strength. Finally, with a grunt of frustration, Calloway turned on his heel and stomped back toward the woods. "This isn't over," he muttered before disappearing into the trees. Eli let out a shaky breath, his legs feeling weak beneath him. Turner placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did good, Eli," he said, his voice warm. "Standing up for what's right isn't easy, but those horses needed someone to speak for them." The mare stepped closer, her nose brushing against Eli's arm as if to thank him. He smiled, the fear from moments ago fading into relief and pride. For the first time, he realized just how much he had changed since the day he first met the horses. They had given him strength, courage, and a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in a long time. As the sun set, Eli and Turner walked back toward the road, leaving the horses to graze peacefully in the fading light. Eli glanced back one last time, his heart swelling with gratitude for the bond he had formed with the wild herd. He knew their connection was something rare and special, a gift he would carry with him forever. In the days following the confrontation with Mr. Calloway, Eli couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that the rancher might return. Though Turner's intervention had driven him off, the man's parting words echoed in Eli's mind like a lingering storm. Determined to protect the horses, Eli started spending more time by the field, keeping a watchful eye on the tree line for any sign of trouble. The mare seemed to sense his unease. Each time Eli approached, she would step forward to greet him, her eyes searching his as if to reassure him. The other horses remained nearby, their calm presence a constant reminder of the bond they shared. Though Eli tried to focus on these moments of peace, his thoughts often wandered to what might happen if Calloway came back. One crisp afternoon, Eli arrived at the field with a backpack filled with apples and water. He set the supplies down by the edge of the road and scanned the horizon, half expecting the horses to appear as they always did. But today, the field was empty. A strange silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Eli's chest tightened as he stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the distant trees. Something felt wrong. The horses had never failed to meet him before, and their absence now sent a ripple of anxiety through him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and ventured deeper into the field, his footsteps quickening with each step. As he neared the edge of the forest, a sound caught his attention, a low, distressed whinny that made his heart leap. Eli broke into a run, pushing through the tall grass until he reached the tree line. There, in a small clearing, he found the herd. The mare stood at the center, her body tense, her ears pinned back as she stared down a figure just beyond the trees. It was Calloway. He was crouched low, a rope in his hands and a determined look on his face. One of the younger horses, the playful one, had been cornered against a fallen log, its eyes wide with fear. Eli's stomach twisted as he realized what was happening. "Get away from them," Eli shouted, his voice breaking through the quiet. Calloway turned sharply, his expression darkening as he spotted the boy. "You again?" he growled, rising to his full height. "This is none of your business, kid. Go home." But Eli didn't move. His fear was overshadowed by a surge of anger and resolve. "They don't belong to you," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "You can't take them." Calloway took a step forward, the rope swinging in his grip. "I warned you last time. Don't push your luck." The mare let out a sharp snort, stepping between Eli and Calloway. Her powerful frame blocked the rancher's path, her stance unyielding. The other horses followed her lead, forming a protective line around the frightened colt. Eli felt a swell of pride at their bravery, but he knew the situation was precarious. Desperate, Eli reached for the only thing he could think of, his whistle. He had used it before to call Turner's attention, and now he hoped it would work again. He brought it to his lips and blew as hard as he could, the sharp sound cutting through the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Calloway's expression twisted with irritation as he stepped closer, but before he could act, a new sound emerged from the distance, the rumble of an engine. Eli's heart leaped as Turner's familiar truck appeared on the horizon, speeding toward the clearing. Relief flooded through him as he realized help was on the way. Calloway hesitated, his grip on the rope faltering as the truck came to a stop. Turner stepped out, his expression a mix of anger and authority. "Calloway," he called out, his voice firm. "I thought I made myself clear. These horses aren't yours to take." The rancher glared at Turner, his frustration evident, but he didn't argue. With a grunt, he dropped the rope and turned to leave, muttering curses under his breath as he disappeared into the woods. Eli let out a shaky breath, his legs trembling as the tension finally broke. Turner approached, placing a steadying hand on Eli's shoulder. "You've got guts, kid," he said with a small smile. "More than most adults I know." Eli nodded, his gaze shifting to the mare. She stepped closer, her eyes meeting his with a look of quiet gratitude. He reached out, resting his hand against her muzzle, and felt a sense of calm wash over him. The bond they shared had been tested, but it had only grown stronger in the face of adversity. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Turner helped Eli guide the horses back to the open field. The herd moved as one, their steps steady and confident. Eli walked alongside the mare, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He had stood up for them, and they had stood by him in return. By the time Eli returned home that evening, the fear and uncertainty he had felt earlier had been replaced by a deep, unwavering connection to the herd. He knew that protecting them was more than a responsibility. It was a calling. And though the road ahead might hold challenges, he felt ready to face them, knowing he wasn't alone. In the days that followed the confrontation with Calloway, the wild horses continued to visit the field, their bond with Eli stronger than ever. The mare remained at the center of their connection, her calm, steady presence a source of reassurance for the boy. Each time Eli approached, the herd would gather around him, their quiet companionship offering him a peace he had long forgotten. Word of the unusual bond spread quickly through the small town. Neighbors began to take notice, and soon, people from nearby villages came to catch a glimpse of the wild horses that had seemingly adopted the young boy as one of their own. Many marveled at the connection Eli shared with the animals, calling it a miracle of nature. For Eli, however, it wasn't about being special. It was about feeling seen, accepted, and needed. Turner, ever watchful, helped Eli create a safe space for the herd. With the community's support, they marked off the open field as a protected area, ensuring the horses could roam freely without fear of capture. The once neglected land became a sanctuary, not just for the herd, but for anyone who sought a moment of solace and connection with nature. One bright morning, Eli stood at the edge of the field, watching as the herd grazed peacefully. Turner joined him, his hands resting on his hips as he surveyed the scene with a satisfied smile. "You've done something special here, Eli," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Not just for these horses, but for this whole town. You've reminded us all of the importance of caring for what we can't control and respecting the beauty of the wild." Eli glanced up at Turner, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied, his voice quiet but sincere. Turner chuckled. "Maybe, but it's your bond with them that made all the difference. That's something no one else could have done." As the sun rose higher, Eli stepped into the field, the mare lifting her head to greet him. He reached out to her, his hand brushing against her muzzle as he whispered a soft "thank you." Though she couldn't answer, her gaze said enough. She had been there when he needed her most, offering a kind of support that no words could provide. The sanctuary soon became a place of healing and hope, not just for Eli but for others as well. Families visited to see the horses, their children laughing as the playful colt approached with gentle curiosity. Elderly neighbors found peace sitting by the field, their worries melting away as they watched the majestic creatures move gracefully through the tall grass. For Eli, the field became a second home, a place where he could remember his father without the weight of grief, where he could grow and find purpose surrounded by the creatures who had changed his life. He began keeping a journal, documenting his encounters with the herd and the lessons he learned from their quiet resilience and strength. As the seasons changed, so did Eli. The shy, lonely boy who had once wandered the countryside in search of solace had grown into someone strong and sure of himself. The horses had given him a gift beyond words, a sense of belonging, a connection to something greater, and the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the field glowed in shades of gold and amber, Eli stood alone at the edge of the field. The mare approached, her steps slow and deliberate, her gaze as steady as ever. He reached out to her, resting his hand against her neck as he whispered, "I'll always protect you. All of you." The mare's soft nicker seemed to echo his promise, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they shared. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Eli felt a profound sense of peace. He knew that no matter where life took him, this field, these horses, and the lessons they had taught him would remain a part of him forever. If Eli's story and the bond he shared with the wild horses touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's spread the message of kindness, connection, and the beauty of protecting what we love.